In this video, I'm going to continue sharing with you the lessons that I've learned during my recent fat loss journey. For those of you who are new to my channel, I've just completed a 22-week cutting phase that started from 4th of October 2025 and ended on 7th of March 2026. And the result is that I dropped my body weight from 89.9 kilos with over 20% body fat all the way down to 72.7 kilos with 6 to 7% body fat. So in the last video, I've created the 5 essential shredding rules for you to follow. This video, however, is all about the choices, or more specifically, default choices. Like a lot of other things in life, just because they're default choices does not necessarily mean they're the best choices for you. And here are 5 unusual choices I've made during my 22-week fat loss journey. They may be unusual, but there are solid reasons behind every choice that I've made. And after watching this video, you may want to make exact the same choices like me. Now, before I talk about each individual unusual choice, I want to emphasize that not only are there solid individual reasons behind every choice, but more importantly, there are interconnected reasons behind the 5 choices I've made as a whole. And this is of particular importance because, spoiler alert, this is not my first round of going on a fat loss phase. I've already undergone 3 rounds of fat loss phase prior to this one. But without a doubt, the latest 22-week cutting is by far the most successful round of fat loss I've executed to this day. And I do believe that the synergistic effect of these 5 choices is the key here. That's why, as I walk you through these 5 choices, I will also explain how one choice can feed into each other, and together, how the synergistic effect that those 5 choices played as a whole made this round of fat loss much more successful than my previous 3 rounds. So the first unusual choice I've made is that I did not use my diet as the main weapon to create the bulk of my caloric deficit. Instead, I've chosen cardio, and more specifically, the boring steady-state cardio as the main weapon. If you have watched some of my old videos, you would know that I've always been a huge proponent of decent to even high volume of weekly cardio training. The cardio training series was the 3rd series I've uploaded to my channel, and to this day, I still think the 3 theories I've made in the end of my cardio training series were some of the most valuable content I've ever created. And not only that, I've also particularly emphasized the unique purpose of cardio training as providing the counterbalance to the negative effect of caloric deficit in my fat loss series. So, not surprisingly, I've faithfully executed my own belief during the last 22 weeks. If you refer to all the weekly fat loss updates that I've uploaded previously, you will find that on average, I was doing 9 to 10 hours of cardio every week. And this unusual choice was well paid off. Not only was I almost never haunted by hunger signals, which is the biggest threat for any fat loss case, but more to the point, I was able to maintain almost normal food consumption and therefore minimize my muscle mass loss. And if it is a bit far-fetched to say that my first choice is unusual, because to be fair, cardio has always been one of the options for fat loss, just not the default choice in most cases, then there should be no debate whatsoever about my second choice being 100% unusual, because the second choice I've made is that the deeper I was in my fat loss phase, the more frequently I did my weight training. This choice is completely against common sense because general fitness consensus tells you that as you embark on your fat loss journey, you should decrease your weight training frequency because, number one, to maintain the existing muscle mass, the required training volume is much less compared to growing more muscle mass. And number two, as the diet fatigue will eventually set in, you won't be able to train as frequently as you can. And for me, until week 17, I was still following this common sense, only maintaining or even reducing my weight training frequency at 2 to 3 times every week. However, due to a small incident that occurred in week 17, I have significantly ramped up my weight training frequency in the last 5 weeks. From week 18 to week 22, I was training 5 to 6 times every week. Pretty much every night, I was doing some weight training in the gym. And this is where the synergistic effect of the first choice comes into play. As I did not use my diet to create the bulk of my caloric deficit, the sufficient food consumption has provided me with enough energy and nutrients to train hard every day. As the training frequency was so high in the last 5 weeks, the body was constantly receiving this message from the training session to keep the muscle mass, and as a result, not only my muscle loss in the last 5 weeks was almost negligible, but also as an extra bonus, starting from week 20, I began to find that I could see more new veins popping out on my arms, particularly on my left bicep. Now, I've been lean before, so I'm very familiar with vascularity, but these new veins were much more nuanced than my previous veins, and they just gave my muscles a much grainier and harder look. And these new veins, they all stayed even after my weight had rebounded from week 22. For those of you who might be familiar with the term, yes, the so-called muscle maturity has finally settled in for me. Instead of the fresh and new baby muscle look, now my muscles look much more seasoned. I'm not saying that what I've done is a surefire way to gain muscle maturity, as muscle maturity only comes with time and always occurs as a serendipity. But I do think there's a point to be made about high training frequency in a caloric deficit that can make your muscles look much harder and more refined. So give this choice a try. You may be pleasantly surprised, just like me. And closely tied into the second choice, the third unusual choice I've made was the leaner I was, the harder I trained my abs. And to be honest, part of the reason why I ramped up my training frequency after week 17 was because I wanted to train my abs every day. Again, this choice is also against common sense, but if you really think about it, this choice also makes perfect sense to almost everyone because let's just call a spade a spade. Nobody loses body fat only for the sake of losing some body fat. The universal motive behind every fat loss case is that you want to look better, leaner, and more impressive. And let's not beat about the bush. Having a set of well-defined six-pack abs is guaranteed to top the wish list of everybody at the end of their fat loss journey. However, this is where common sense fools you again. I know numerous fitness experts keep telling you that abs are made in the kitchen. This statement is only partially true. Yes, lowering your body fat can definitely help you reveal your abdominal muscles, and compound exercises do train your core to some extent. But for most people, this is only enough for you to reveal your abs, and definitely not enough to make them pop. I particularly mentioned this point in my week 19 fat loss update video. Back then, I was already about 10% body fat, yet my abs still did not have that deep ashed 3D eye-catching pop. They still look a bit shallow and petite, and just look how much deeper and more defined they were after 6 weeks of hardcore, pardon the pun, hardcore training. Definitely much more eye-catchy than before. I know well-defined abs are more like the cherry on top situation when it comes to your total muscular development, and obsession with abs is probably the biggest threat to your total muscular development. But boy oh boy, don't let it look nice on a muscular body and just make the physique complete and more impressive. So if you already decided to go on a cart, you might as well rip off this little sweet cherry as a final reward. Train your abs extra hard in the end and show everyone that your six-pack abs is the best payoff after a long and arduous fat loss journey. And by the way, what's my go-to exercise to develop my six-pack abs? The standing ab wheel rolling. I call this one the daddy of all core exercises. PSA, you probably should start from the leaning down version first, as the standing version is extremely difficult, challenging even to me to this day. But once you master this exercise, all the other core exercises will be so easy for you, and your abs will be so strong that when you flex them, they're going to feel hard like bricks. The fourth unusual choice is the weight training split. And if you have watched some of my previous training split series, you can probably guess which split I've chosen during my fat loss phase. Yes, it is the least popular full body training split, as the lower body constitutes more than half of your total muscle mass. It makes sense to train them as frequently as possible during the bulking phase because it has the biggest growing potential. However, I think this split makes even more sense in the cutting phase because when you go through a very long fat loss phase, the body part that is going to incur the most extra amount of muscle mass loss will be your legs. And you should trust me when I tell you this because this is coming from someone who had 27 plus inches legs before the cut and only 24-inch thighs now. I could legitimately say that my legs were humongous before the cut. But when I properly leaned myself down, despite training legs 4 to 5 times every week in the last 5 weeks, my leg size has still shrunk a ton, and they only looked normal and proportioned to my whole physique. And this is the best result I could achieve, meaning from huge legs to proportion legs, full body split training my legs 4 to 5 times every week after a proper cut. Think about what kind of leg size you can make if you go on a proper cut with average sized legs and only training them once a week. Or even worse, skip it altogether. By the end of the fat loss phase, you are going to find that your leg size will be so small and your upper and lower body balance will be totally out of whack. So if you don't want to be mocked for having chicken legs, you probably should consider using full body split during the cutting phase to maintain your leg size as much as possible. And my fifth and the last unusual choice is that on a lot of days when I felt lack of energy and did not want to do any training, I still went ahead and did at least some cardio training. Now, you can interpret this choice as just the execution of hard discipline, but there's also some logic to it, and I will be explaining the logic in a moment. But first, there's no avoiding periodic fatigue and no desire to train when you go on a very long cut. That's just the body's natural response to being in a caloric deficit environment for too long. And the situation will be further exacerbated if you heavily rely on your diet to create the caloric deficit. Normally, in this kind of situation, the default recommendation would be just to take a day off and skip the training. However, there have also been enough studies done on endorphins. This powerful neurotransmitters released by your brain after exercise can really perk you up and make you feel positive again. Now, it has to be said there are different levels of required preparedness for cardio training and weight training. Usually, you have to be a lot more prepared mentally and physically to go through an intense weight training session. So, when I was feeling low energy, I generally would not force myself to do another session of weight training. But as the required preparedness for a session of cardio training is much lower, I could always buckle up and just do one more hour of cardio session. And lucky enough, prolonged aerobic exercise is probably the best way for the body to release endorphins after the exercise. That's why on a lot of days one was feeling low energy before the training and did not want to do any training, I actually felt much better and much more energetic after I forced myself through another hour on the ellipticals. And once again, the last choice was tied into my very first and second choice and created this synergistic effect. Not only cardio training has allowed me to maintain almost normal food consumption and also nutrient consumption, but has also kept my mood more energetic during the whole fat loss phase, which enabled me to be more mentally and physically prepared for high frequency of weight training, particularly in the last 5 weeks. So there we have it, 5 unusual choices I've made during my 22-week fat loss journey. Hopefully you have learned a thing or two from my experiences and will try them when you go on a cut yourself. If you have enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. And if you want to know more details about my fat loss journey and don't mind my boring presentation, you can click on the link and watch all my previous fat loss weekly updates. In the next video, I will share my updated thoughts on two controversial topics, maintaining and overtraining after this fellow's journey. So please stay tuned. Thank you for your support, and I will see you all in the next video.